Good Monday evening, ladies and gentlemen. You are tuned in to the Joseph Benamy Show. I'm your host, Joseph Benamy. Thanks for joining. Well, the heat wave is over here in Canada. We had the air conditioner on only one day. Actually, I should say, because Canada's a big country, the heat wave is over here in Ottawa, and it's been pleasant the last few days. And why am I introducing that particular topic to start with? Well, because everybody's talking about breaking heat records. And of course, I just want to remind people right off the top of the show that the only records that have been broken are daily records. So if it just so happens that the maximum temperature in your city was 25 degrees, which is really not that hot, and it happened to reach 27 degrees yesterday, for example, then that means you've set a new heat record. But trust me, okay, calm down. The country is not burning up. Yes, it is true that we're having a bit more of a wildfire active season than we're used to at this time of the season. But, that's a cyclical thing. Some years there are fewer, some years there are more. And this happens to be a year there were more. So, again, calm down. This is not evidence of anything more than it just so happens that for whatever reason we're having more wildfires in Canada than we normally do at this time of the year. And most of those, by the way, have been caused by, well, I don't know if it's most of them, maybe I shouldn't really say that, but a significant number of them have been caused by human carelessness. Anyway, whether it's human carelessness or it's just nature itself, okay, fires in forests are a normal thing. So, as I say, just calm down, take a pill, relax. The world is not about to burn up. Anyway, as I say, thanks for joining us. It is Monday, June the 5th, 2023. And tonight, schools in the state of Utah banning the Bible? Is this for real? We're going to get into it tonight. But first, as usual, we're going to talk a little bit about headlines that have crossed my crossed my desk earlier today, caught my eye, and that I thought that you would be interested in. First of all, okay, boy, if you are Canadian and you've been around for a few years, okay, if you're in your 40s or 50s, I guess, you may not realize this if you're in your 30s because you're probably still too young, but Paul Bernardo was a horrific murderer. He and his wife at the time, Karla Homolka, were involved in the murders of a few young teenagers, one of whom was the younger sister of Karla herself. And I don't want to get into the details. They're horrific details. Paul Bernardo was a serial rapist before he moved on to murder, and grotesque, horrific murders. Dismemberment of bodies, encasing them in cement, trying to dispose. It was terrible, terrible. Anyway, they finally caught this guy. He's been in prison since then, in the mid '90s, and now we've just learned that Paul Bernardo is not being released. He's a dangerous offender, which means that you can keep him in jail indefinitely. Okay, notwithstanding, the regular sentencing rules. So, but Paul Bernardo has been transferred out of maximum security, and he's been moved to an open campus medium security prison somewhere in the province of Quebec. And that is justifiably causing consternation and outrage here in Canada amongst people who have a pretty clear recollection of what this monster did to those young girls. I don't think I mean, I believe in rehabilitation, but as somebody far wiser than me once pointed out in a column that she wrote for the Ottawa Citizen a number of years ago, some people deserve to die. And this is one case where an individual deserved to die as compensation, as punishment for the crimes that he committed. Sometimes it's just not about rehabilitation. Sometimes it's just about, society gets to pull the trigger, pull the lever on the platform. If you're going to hang them, flick the switch, depress the plunger, whatever metaphor you want to use. Some people deserve to die, and I'm afraid Paul Bernardo is one of them. So I don't care about rehabilitation in this case. He's forfeited his life. He forfeited his life 30 years ago. Why is this man still walking and now in a medium security prison? There is something fundamentally wrong with our sense of justice, not our justice system, our sense of justice and our sense of what is right and wrong, that we don't punish adequately somebody of his heinous character. What's next here? The federal government has decided to provide emergency funding to pride festivals across the country, ostensibly because of the rise in hate crimes. At least that is what they're talking about. This is what the headlines are saying. And then if you dig deeper into the story, okay, first of all, federal government providing $1.5 million to pride organizations to help offset additional security costs. That's what they're saying. But go down and dig a little further and listen to what they're talking about. Let's see. The potential money will likely come as a relief to Pride Toronto organizers. The festival's executive director, Sherwin Modeste, told CP24 last month that Pride Toronto's security costs had jumped from $62,000 to $185,000, in part, now pay attention to this, in part due to some additional programming. Okay, so this isn't about a jump in hate-related material or actual security threats. This is an expansion of the programming that they've planned, and they have to provide security at their programs. And so security costs have gone up. What else? Insurance costs. Okay. The insurance cost to put on the event this year apparently has risen from $67,000 to approximately $270,000. So when you take the added cost of security as a result of expanding the programming around the Pride Parade and Festival in Toronto, we're using Toronto as an example here, but I'm sure it's replicated across the country. Toronto is the main Pride Festival, the main Pride Parade. So we have now a situation where they've expanded their programming, and as a consequence of that, they have to pay extra security costs. Perfectly normal, perfectly understandable. Plus, their insurance costs have gone up significantly. And as a consequence of all of this, they were cash short. They were short on cash. So the federal government now is stepping in and using your tax dollars to continue to pay for this parade. Now, what I'm going to say is going to be interpreted and presented as being homophobic, transphobic, or whatever. And, frankly, I have my personal views, but what is morally incorrect for me, maybe other people are not going to consider it morally incorrect. Whatever, okay? I'm not trying to say that people shouldn't do what they do in the privacy of their own homes. I'm not into that whole scene, okay? But I will say this, just as I am opposed to public schools flying the pride flag, because I don't think we should be sexualizing our children, At the same time, I don't think that we should be sexualizing public policy. So, I'm not in favor of pride parades. I don't think that we should be doing these sex parades, whether it's pride, whether it's same sex, trans, or heterosexual. I just, can we have a return to just basic propriety, basic decency in public affairs, in public life? Okay, it's bad enough that we have these parades. And by the way, if this was a heterosexual pride parade, I'd be against it just as much. It's bad enough that we have these parades, but to use taxpayers' money to fund these things, it's just it just sticks in my throat. Here in Ottawa, garbage bag tags are coming here in Ottawa, it looks like. And the whole idea is to reduce the number of bags that are being produced by people, by homeowners, in order to prolong the lifespan of our current city dump. Here's the real problem with this tag initiative. It punishes families. It doesn't punish the elderly people who maybe are only producing one bag a week of garbage anyway. It doesn't it doesn't penalize, or it doesn't do anything with the couple, doesn't hurt the couple who don't have children. This is just piling on more expense to families with children who are going to produce more than one garbage bag a week. We don't produce very much garbage. My wife and I live alone, but when the children come and the grandchildren come, yeah, for sure, we produce a significant amount more of garbage. So I just, it's just piling on again, piling on. And by the way, I don't know if anyone noticed, but we're paying for that service in the first place. So you know what we like to say, right? When is a 0% tax increase? By the way, we didn't have 0% tax increase here in Ottawa. But when is a 0% tax increase not a 0% tax increase? When you keep the level of taxation the same, but you reduce services. That's raising taxes through the back door. Politicians practice that an awful lot, and we let them get away with it. Bad. Let's see. On the international scene. Okay, I'm going to try to pronounce this place. Forgive me if I butcher it. Bhubaneswar, India. Train crash. Worst disaster in India. Deadliest train crash in India in decades. On Monday. No, it wasn't this Monday. Sorry. 275 people in a train crash died. That's dead, not injured. Dead. And that number continues to rise. Our prayers go out to the families of the dead and the injured. But my goodness gracious, 275 people dying in a train crash. It just beggars the imagination. In the United States, former U.S. Vice President Mike Pence has announced that he is going to be seeking the GOP nomination for president for 2024, lining him up with Ron DeSantis and a number of other people who are going to be challenging Donald Trump. Now, the strategy here is, I think, very interesting. Donald Trump is way ahead when it comes to polling and in the GOP and the race for the presidential nomination. Not so much in the head-to-head for the general election. He is ahead, but other people also are fitting in there on the GOP side. The last time I checked, Ron DeSantis up against Joe Biden would win. So the real race here is in the GOP for the nomination. And as I say, Trump is way ahead. So the strategy here has to be this. You enter the race expecting that Donald Trump is not going to be the nominee, not because he loses, but because of all of the swirling legal issues around him. And these guys must be making a calculation that he, in fact, is going to be forced out of the race or he'll drop out of the race voluntarily, whatever. And so they're positioning themselves not to beat Donald Trump, but to beat one another so that they end up the nominee if and when Donald Trump jumps out. And at the same time, they would be positioning themselves potentially to be the vice presidential nominee. And except for Mike Pence. I have a lot of time for Mike Pence. I like him a lot. But there's no way that if Donald Trump is the nominee, he chooses Mike Pence again. And I just think that's the obvious reality. Yesterday, June the 4th, was the 34th anniversary of Tiananmen Square. And my goodness, time flies. 1989. June the 4th. So 34 years ago yesterday, and a demonstration in Hong Kong, and of course the Chinese government cracking down on any protests commemorating that particular event. And I'm not going to bore you with details. If you've never heard of Tiananmen Square because you're younger, and I guess I could say that if anyone who's younger than 40 years old probably doesn't know about Tiananmen Square unless they've, learned about it through history classes, etc., or they've read about it. But look it up. Very fascinating event. Okay, we're going to go for a break. When we come back, we are going to get into this whole thing about banning the Bible in, of all places, school districts in Utah. You don't want to miss that. So we'll be back in a couple of minutes here on the Joseph Ben-Ami Show. Stay tuned. And we are back. Thanks for sticking with us. You are tuned in to the Joseph Ben-Ami Show for Monday, June the 5th, 2023. I am your host, Joseph Ben-Ami. All right. Of all the places where you would never expect this to happen, a school district in the state of Utah has decided to remove the Bible from libraries in their elementary and middle schools. The school district is, let me just pull it up here for you. The district is Davis School District, located just north of Salt Lake City. And the decision was made after a parent complained that the book had material unsuitable for children. Okay, so material unsuitable for children. And the phrase that's being bantered about is that the book, the Bible, is full of vulgarity and violence. Vulgarity and violence. Now, I was sitting down and I was thinking I should write a column about this, and the word that kept it bouncing around in my head was ignorant. And when I use the term ignorant, I'm using it in the proper meaning. That is to say, lacking knowledge or information. Because any parent who's going to make a complaint that the Bible, and in this case we were talking about the King James Version, that the Bible is full of vulgarity and violence is completely off base. They've never read the book. They've never read, forget about reading the book in its entirety. They've never opened it up and even read 10 pages from it. I'll concede that the Bible can be violent, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. But vulgar? Vulgar. Yeah. Hang on just a second. Some other complaints by parents back in March that the biblical text is, quote, listen to this, one of the most sex-ridden books around, end quote. I don't know what you're reading, but I'm pretty sure, no, I'm not pretty sure, I know that there's virtually no sex in the Bible. There are some allusions to it in the procreative sense. You know, Adam and Eve begat so-and-so, and so-and-so begat so-and-so. But other than that, there are no references to sex in the Bible. None. Now, the people who were behind the decision to remove the Bible from libraries in this particular school district, one wonders what exactly is the process whereby they analyze complaints and they decide that they have to act on them. Okay? I don't get it. If somebody makes a complaint about a book and says that this book is anti-Semitic, for instance, well, before anybody reacts to that, it behooves them to actually read the book to determine whether or not the complaint is valid. It's legitimate. Anybody who has read the Bible knows that a complaint that it's full of sex, what is it? Oh, it's the most sex-ridden book around? Or one of the most sex-ridden books around? I mean, that's absurd. It is utterly false. So, on what basis do you make a decision to validate this claim by following through with a request that it be removed from library shelves? I don't get it. There are times that things happen out there, ladies and gentlemen, I have to tell you. There are times when I look at what's going on around us and I think, is everybody on drugs? Yeah, maybe they are. I don't know. But you would expect that in Utah, of all places, this wouldn't be a problem. Um, and I'll even go further than this. Okay, let's forget about for a moment. Let's just forget for a moment about the substance of the complaint. One of the complainants, apparently, and I'm reading here from a news report. Um, this is a quote. I thank the Utah legislature and Utah Parents United for making this bad faith process so much easier and way more efficient. Now, apparently part of the complaints were in reaction to some laws that have been passed in Utah where the legislature is trying to assert itself when it comes to books in libraries and curricula in schools and what's in being taught, not just what's being taught, but what's available to students. And the idea being, I don't have all of the details on this, but my understanding is that the legislation is an attempt to control, to counter what has become a serious woke influence, progressive influence in the schools. And it's a reaction to the proliferation of sexually explicit material, particularly around the LGBTQ agenda. And this is not just in Utah. This has been happening in various states in the United States as well. And it happens here in Canada as well. It's not happening so much at the provincial education ministry level, but you are getting parents more and more who are becoming active and saying, we don't want this sexualization of our children to be occurring in our schools. And I don't think that's unreasonable. I don't know that I agree with the process that's being initiated, the legislative process. I'm always uncomfortable with the idea of empowering the state. And by the state, I mean the government, of empowering the government to determine what is and what is not acceptable reading, acceptable speech, acceptable books and material in schools. I think that parents are perfectly capable of controlling what happens in their school boards, in their school districts, and in the schools where their children attend. So I don't necessarily agree, even if I understand the movement, I don't necessarily agree with the process that has been put in place in a number of these jurisdictions that allows the government to make a determination as to what is and what is not acceptable. Okay, but that's what they've done. They've done it in Utah and they've done it in other places. So along comes somebody who is, and this is not just my opinion, this individual complainant is saying this right out. I'm quoting it here again. I thank the Utah legislature and Utah Parents United, that's one of the advocacy organizations pushing for this type of legislation, for making this bad faith process so much easier and way more efficient. Now, pay attention now we can all ban books and you don't even have to read them or be accurate about it. Heck, you don't even need to see the book, the parent added in the complaint. Now, if I happen to be an official of this school board and I'm reviewing the complaints that have been brought before me, I would read this and I would think to myself, this is a pretty strong indication that this complaint is not being made in good faith. That this complaint, these and similar complaints, are being brought as a way of exerting political pressure in opposition to the legislation. Now, that's a perfectly legitimate thing to do in a free and democratic society. You're going to have laws, you're going to have a legislative process, And there are going to be people who are in favor of a particular law and people who are against. And there's always going to be that tension, and there's going to be some, I don't want to use the word confrontation, but competition of ideas. That's part and parcel of living in a free society, and it's not an unhealthy thing. But when you have officials who are charged with enforcing the law, and you have these complaints that are brought before you, and it's clear that the complaint is not being made in good faith, surely to goodness, you're going to exercise, I know I would exercise my discretion, my authority that's been granted to me to make this decision. I would say, you're not serious. You're not serious. This is not a serious complaint. And because it's not a serious complaint, I'm not going to follow through with any action on it. I would dismiss this complaint right away. Not just because of my knowledge of the Bible, but because it's not a good faith complaint. It's a complaint that's being made in order to make a political point. And they're entitled to make a complaint in order to make a political point. That doesn't mean that these officials have to follow through with it, that they have to grant it some sort of legitimacy that it doesn't have on its very face. So I have to say this, shame on these officials that they would follow through and they would do this ban. I suspect that it has as much to do with just wanting to have the quiet life. Why do I want it? If this is going to erupt in my school district, I don't want to be the one that's going to be subjected to the opprobrium of the LGBTQ community or the Christian community. Although I don't know how you escape being subjected to ridicule from the Christian community. Heck, I'm ridiculing you and I'm not even Christian, I'm Jewish. Let's take a quick break, okay? We'll pick up this discussion a little more on the other side of the break. So stay tuned. We'll be back in a couple of minutes here on the Joseph Ben.
It's just a feeling that this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a look I think this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a feeling that this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a look I think this might be right for us, for you and me.
And we are back. Thanks for staying with us. You are tuned into the Joseph Ben-Ami Show for Monday, June the 5th, 2023. We're talking about banning the Bible in elementary and middle schools in the state of Utah in the United States. A more or less, on balance, religious state. Now, there are a lot of Mormons in Utah, but I don't think that you're going to have a whole lot of Mormons asking for the King James Version of the Bible to be removed from school shelves. And let's be perfectly fair here. This is not across the board. We're talking about some complaints that were made to a particular school district north of Salt Lake City, Davis School District, and the decisions that were made there. So if it's happening in other school districts, it may well be, but that's not what we're talking about, and I don't have any information that leads me to believe that this whole move is being replicated in other school districts. But it's bad enough if it happens in one school district. And I'm sure that it's going to happen again and again and again. I don't think that there's really any chance of this being a completely isolated incident. So I was mentioning that it was pretty clear to me, based on what some of the complainants were saying, that this was not really a good faith complaint. And in fairness, again, how could it be a good faith complaint if you're complaining that the King James Version of the Bible is, quote, one of the most sexual, or what's the word? What exactly is the term that was used? Let me just pull it up again here for a second. One of the most sex-ridden books around. I mean, the very fact that you're saying that about the Bible, okay, any version of the Bible, is pretty solid evidence to me that it's not a serious complaint. You either haven't read the book, or you've read the book and you know very well that that's just categorically false. The Bible is virtually sex-free. It does refer to sex in the reproductive sense, as I mentioned earlier, and there are one or two, maybe a handful of incidents where some sexual crimes, rape, or attempted seduction took place. But other than that, okay, it's not a sex-ridden document, and it's just absurd, slanderous, in fact, to say it is. But what about this complaint about it being vulgar and violent? Because vulgarity, of course, doesn't necessarily mean sexual. Well, I'm trying to think of any instance where anybody could say that the Bible narrative, any version of the Bible, unless you're talking about some progressive, idiotic version that's been written in order to have some shock value, and I'm not aware that there is any version like that out there, but it wouldn't surprise me that somebody has done that. But any of the mainstream versions of the Bible, and in this case we're talking about the King James Version, but any version, I'm racking my brain trying to think of a single instance of vulgarity in any version of the Bible. I can't think of one. I'm sorry. I mean, if I'm wrong about this, go on my website, send me an email, okay, use the contact form. josephbenamy.com is the website address, all one word, without a hyphen. So I don't get it. Or I do get it. These, again, people are making this complaint, but they're not doing it in good faith. So what about the violence? Well, I don't think that there's anyone that can say that there isn't a lot of violence in the Bible, at least in the Old Testament. I use the term Old Testament for my Jewish listeners and that. No, I'm not. Don't read anything into what I'm saying. I'm just using the common terminology, okay? In the Hebrew scriptures, let me phrase it that way. There is a lot of violence in the Hebrew scriptures. But there's a lot of violence in histories of World War II. There's a lot of references to violence and battles in any history account. Are we now going to ban any book that has references to wars and battles that were committed? And even atrocities that were committed, perhaps? Because we don't want our youth to be exposed to any kind of violence? How, if you're an American, how do you teach the history of the United States if you're not allowed to refer to the Revolutionary War because it's violence? How do you teach the end of slavery, the history of slavery, and not make a reference in the United States to the American Civil War? For that matter, how do you teach the history of slavery without any kind of a reference to any kind of violence? I mean, surely there was some violence that was perpetrated against individuals as a consequence of their race. Again, so how you could say that we're going to ban the Bible because part of the Bible, the Old Testament in the King James Version, happens to have a lot of references to wars and battles that were fought during that time. It's beyond me. Because if that's the standard you're going to set, then you have to do that for all references to historical wars and battles. We can no longer learn about the Romans and the Roman Empire. We can no longer learn about Napoleonic wars in Europe. We can no longer learn about, as I said, World War I or World War II, or the Korean War, or the Vietnam War. What are we going to do? Are you guys going to knock down the World War II memorial in Washington, D.C.? Are you going to destroy the Vietnam Veterans Wall in Washington? It's absurd. I can't, even using the term absurd, in my view, does not do justice to how foolish, how idiotic this particular decision is, based on the criteria that we have in front of us. But it gets even worse than that, ladies and gentlemen, if you could believe it. Okay, dare I remind decision makers in Davis School District in the state of Utah in the United States that the Bible, the King James Bible, is a Christian Bible. It's not just the Hebrew scriptures. And Jesus was a purveyor of nonviolence. He preached nonviolence. And you can't preach nonviolence without an understanding of what violence is. People call Jesus the Prince of Peace. So, how do you? I've said this in the past. I'd rather be right than consistent. So, if there's something that I'm missing here, if there's something in this whole discussion that I've missed, and it would have to be something pretty profound, then, enlighten me. Tell me about it. Send me an email, okay, and I will I will talk about it on the show. I will explain to everybody out there how I have been wrong. But I don't think I am wrong on this. This, my friends, is just another symptom of the general degradation in the quality of thinking that we have at our government level. Our leaders in society are no longer leaders. We have very few leaders out there who have the integrity and the character to lead. Nobody is more unconfrontational than I am. I don't want confrontation. And that's a good thing. I don't think leaders should be seeking confrontation, but nor should they shy away from confrontation when they're standing for the right. And I don't mean that in the political sense. I mean right versus wrong in that sense. And in this case, while there may be political overtones to the debate, there's clearly a right and a wrong here. And the officials at Davis School District in Utah are wrong to knuckle under to the bad faith pressure that's being put on them by opponents of whatever law the Utah legislature has brought into being. And they should be prepared to stand up and say that. You want to protest the law? That's fine. But don't use the Bible and don't use the schools and school libraries as your weapon or your pawn or whatever in that confrontation, in that debate. It doesn't belong. Let's not make our children suffer. And by golly, ladies and gentlemen, when you tell children that they cannot be exposed to the Bible, that I cannot think of a greater attack on the foundations of Western civilization than that. It is a serious, profound attack on the very foundations of our civilization. Okay, we have to go for another break. And when we come back, I will tie up whatever loose ends we have to tie up, a couple of administrative issues, so stick with us. We'll be back in a couple of minutes here on the Joseph Banamy Show. welcome back. You are tuned into the Joseph Ben-Ami Show for Monday, June the 5th, 2023. I am your host, Joseph Ben-Ami. Thanks for sticking with us. We've just spent the last half hour or so excoriating officials from the Davis School District in Utah for having knuckled under, that's the only term that I can come up with, to complainants who have been demanding that the King James Version of the Bible be removed from elementary and middle schools in that school district. On the grounds, Ray, if you've just tuned in, on the grounds of vulgarity and violence, and the claim that it's, quote, one of the most sex-ridden books out there, end quote. If I seem tongue-tied, if I seem lost for words, it's because, quite frankly, I actually am to a certain degree. And it doesn't happen often, but in this case, oh my goodness gracious. I mean, the only term that I can use is that I could see is that these officials have knuckled under because they want the quiet life. They don't want controversy. They don't want anybody. So make a complaint and we're going to follow through. So this is the decision that they've made. It's clear that the complaints were made in bad faith. And on the evidence, on the substance of the complaints, there's just no evidence whatsoever to support these claims. They're just absurd. Anybody who has actually read the Bible knows how absurd they are. Just to finish that whole point, let me reiterate again that yes, there is violence in the Bible, but it's relating historical facts or stories, okay? It's not advocating violence against anybody. The Bible is basically, the Israelites made war against the Moabites, that kind of thing. I don't mean to belittle it. Of course, it's a lot more detailed and complicated than that, but you can't not talk about the history of Judaism and Christianity and not refer back to a period of time where there was a lot of unrest and different national groups, including the Jews, made war against their neighbors, okay? And their neighbors made war against them. And if you're going to ban the Bible because there's references to wars, well, then you're going to have to ban all books that make reference to war, like history of World War II, the history of World War I, the American Revolution, heck, all of American history, and much of Canadian history, and much of British history. Okay, it's just nonsensical. Okay, I guess we've beaten that horse to death. I don't know what else we could say about it, my friends. A few things, housekeeping items. First of all, the consultations that the CRTC was holding on the question of whether or not Fox News Network should be banned in Canada are now closed. I'm not sure whether or not they're going to actually convene public hearings, so stay tuned on that. As soon as we have information one way or the other about that, we will pass that information on to you. If you haven't signed up for our email updates, my email updates, just go to the website, josephbenami.com, all one word without the hyphen, and sign up for email updates. It's free. We don't share our email lists with anybody, but we'll keep you up to date about what's happening. And even if you're down in the United States or in any other country, it's always interesting to know what's happening in other countries. So sign up for your email updates, and we'll keep you up to date on what's happening up here, as well as, what's happening around the Joseph Ben-Ami Show. So, and especially when it comes down to the decision that the CRTC, for those of you who don't know, the CRTC is the Canadian Television and Radio Commission, Canadian Radio and Television Commission, and that is the regulatory body here over broadcasting, etc. So we will let you know as soon as we hear of any decisions that have been made with that in that respect. And again, if you have anything that you want to say about the potential for digital currency, go to the website, josephbenamy.com, and there are instructions on the left side of the page for how you can have your voice heard. And it's so important. I know I'm kind of like a broken record here, my friends, but it is so important that you stay engaged and take the opportunity to express your views on anything in public policy. Remember, I know you're constantly hearing the system is rigged. What's the point? The point is this, ladies and gentlemen. You never know what positive impact you're going to have by having your say. I can't guarantee that by participating in the democratic process that you are going to get your way, that we are going to win. What I can guarantee, ladies and gentlemen, is if you do not participate, then we will lose all of these battles. I guarantee it. So for all of you who hear the system is rigged, do not allow that to deter you from getting involved and getting engaged at whatever level. You know, you don't have to run for office. Some people could run for office. Some people should just join political parties. It's a great way to have your say and to have some influence over how things are going at the political level. You should get involved in the democratic process in your provincial politics or state level. And municipal level is so important. School boards, well, we've been talking about the whole show with the school board in Utah. It's so important for you to be involved. Don't be discouraged. Do not let yourself be intimidated, and do not let yourself be discouraged by all of the people out there that say the system is rigged. Okay? Rigged system or no, we live in a democratic society and we have to participate. If we don't participate, that, my friends, is the only sure way that we're going to lose these battles. And there are many more coming. Big battles, trust me. We'll get into that as the week goes on. Some very important, very troubling initiatives are going to be coming down very soon here in Canada. So you want to pay close attention. Make sure that you sign up for email updates on our website. And if you're listening on Rumble, or if you're watching on Rumble, or if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe. Doesn't cost you anything. Okay, what else? Tomorrow is the 79th anniversary of D-Day. So we're going to have a chat about that tomorrow. Very interesting stuff. Very interesting perspectives to discuss. Okay, it is time for me, ladies and gentlemen, to thank you very much for joining in. I appreciate it. Please do tell your friends and neighbors about us. And tune in again tomorrow night here on the Joseph Ben-Ami Show, where we speak truth to power.